Hi, welcome everyone. So thank you so much for coming. I wanted actually to start with Patty. Did you want to say something about CHS? We have to thank her because she's hosting us today.
Hello, everyone. I'm program manager here at California Historical Society. I've been a museum worker for about 15 years now, and I've been here for 3.5. I want to thank all of our speakers for being here tonight, and all of you. Right now, you're in the midst of an exhibition of vintage wine, beer, spirit, and food labels from the 1930s. We invite you to come back. It's open through April 23rd. And we have a great set of programs. And if you ever have any questions about working public programs and education, you can always grab me for any questions. Thank you again. Thank you to you all. And I'll hand it back to Brenda.
Sweet. So, I just wanted to introduce my full self. I'm Brenda Salguero, and I will be your moderator tonight. I am the volunteer manager at the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library. That is what I do. And basically the structure for tonight, I kind of wanted to just go over it really quick, is we're going to have a question aimed specifically at a panelist, and then we're going to have kind of general questions to just open up to everyone. There are 3 sections that we're kind of discussing tonight: interviewing and negotiation, evaluation and raises, exit interview, and resignation process. All very exciting topics. We have 20 minutes for each section. And we're hoping to have about a 15-minute Q&A at the end and a little mixer at the end as well. So let me get started by introducing you to all our wonderful panelists. So the first one I have, and if a panelist can actually raise their hand and show. So the first one tonight is Gail Anderson from Gail Anderson and Associates. We have Erin Garcia, Managing Curator at the California Historical Society. Yay! We have Sarah Groh, who's the Board President for the Bay Area Emerging Museum Professionals and Assistant Manager of Membership and Admissions at the Bay Area Discovery Museum. We have James Leventhal tonight, Director of Development at the San Jose Museum of Art. We have Ayana Reed, Director of Human Resources for the Oakland Museum of California. And then we have Kimi Zuluaga, Human Resources Generalist at Gap Inc. So, I know, fancy. And so please, we have extended bios in the program, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to get started. So, let's see. What's my first question? So the first question we actually have in the category of interviewing and negotiation is aimed at Kimi. So Kimi, what are some good practices to prepare for an interview that would help calm any anxiety or nerves someone's feeling?
Thanks for having us here, Brenda. Thank you all for coming. So in preparation for an interview, I don't think you can ever be too prepared. And so one important thing to start out with is definitely know your audience. Understand this organization or this company's work and how it's relative in the industry and space they're in, and also your opinion on what they're doing, whether it's a service, an exhibition, or education, whatever they're trying to do. Definitely understand how that's relative in the current space and what your opinion on it is, and if you have an idea for improvement, bring that up. And also, you can always utilize LinkedIn. I think it's really important to connect with people who I've either worked in this space before, currently do. Just reach out to them, tell them why you want to talk to them. Don't be afraid to introduce yourself. That's why a service like that exists. And people are always happy to meet with you or talk to you on the phone and kind of get ahead, get a preview of what the culture's like, what the work-life balance is, what's important to this organization, and ask yourself, do I really see myself fitting in there? Because when you come to the actual interview, you want to set yourself up well and already have insight to what their expectations are, how these people function. And lastly, besides gaining a knowledge base, I think it's really important before you go on the interview, when you're actually in the building, loosen up, get a breath of fresh air. Don't tie yourself to the seat when you're waiting to go in. Find a restroom or a space you feel like you can breathe and walk around. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with a power stance, but I like to do it before any interview or any big meeting where I have any nerves, because it just alleviates all this weight off of my chest and my shoulders. And then all of a sudden there's all this clarity and the noise and interference in my head that was creating doubt is just like, I got this. So I'm gonna do a little example. If you want to see a power stance, this is just an example of what I like to do, but feel free to do your own dance, you know? I just like to like stretch out, go like this, and deep breaths. And when you breathe out, you can physically feel just like the stress leaving you. And thank you. And one important thing to remember is just getting to the point of an accepted opportunity to have an interview is difficult. There's hundreds or thousands of applicants every day, like competing for jobs like yours. So the fact that they've already filtered through many and want to engage with you, you're already 10 steps ahead, and you have to have the confidence to show that you're capable. So give yourself that boost and just show them what you're capable of, and feel free to share ideas. That's what they're really curious about. Like, what are you going to offer, and how are you going to bring value?
Thank you. You're welcome. So anyone have, okay, so does anyone on the panel have a story or experience to offer as good practice, like something anecdotal? Something that happened?
Is this on? Okay. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little, so it's scratchy. But when I was in grad school, one of my professors gave me a bit of advice for interviewing for jobs that I still sort of take to heart. She said, you have to feel sexy when you go in an interview. Not, of course, like punching neckline or whatever, but you need to feel like you're, I'm so sexy self. And so it's important to not worry so much about being exactly the mold of the place you're going, but to like dress yourself and feel yourself to be in your kind of, hot self moment. So that's just one bit of advice. Anybody have? Oops, maybe not.
This way. This is, I think, a little tangential, and it's sort of pre-interview. I just really recommend that you have a bit of a career plan, and that you have, and I can give you some tips after we're done about how to do that, so that you know how the position that you're applying for fits into your game plan, and you know your own strengths as to why you're appealing and qualified. But you also might, if you're self-aware, which is the other thing I would really urge you to be very, very honest with yourself, and if there are some weak areas, perhaps even thinking about how you might enhance those. So I just really believe that is important. I totally agree with you about I call it power dressing. Years ago, I would have to go, when I was at JFK, go over to administration, and the staff would go, you must be heading over there. This was in the days of shoulder pads. So my blouse had shoulder pads, my check, I looked like a football player, but anyway. I'm going to pass it to, I think Ayana had something to say, but I have bad experiences to share when the moment is right.
Yeah, I won't share any stories, but one of the things that I would add is come with informed questions for the interview panel or the person that you're meeting with. That is one of the cues that I know that we pay attention to. If you don't come with any informed questions, it shows that you may not have done your homework and your research, or that you may not have that deep interest truly in the organization, in the position. So really be prepared, come with informed questions, and that also helps you determine if it's the right fit for you. Is it the right culture for you? Is it the right position? Does it align with your skill set? Will it help you grow? If you are able to ask those questions and listen for the answers that they give you, because those are the cues that will determine if you're interviewing the company just as much as they are interviewing you, so if that is the right organization for you.
Oh, Ayana, actually keep the mic, because I am going to actually ask you the next question. Okay. So, when should you ask a question about wages, salary, or benefits?
Right. So this really depends upon the culture of the organization. So pay attention to the cues when you're either phone screening or interviewing or through their application process. So I'll give you an example. At the Oakland Museum of California, we believe in realistic job previews. So we ask your salary expectations through the application process so that we're clear. We don't use that as a barrier because sometimes your salary may be above what we're able to pay or below. That doesn't mean that you're not qualified for the position. So we will still call you, but we're able to have the informed conversation during our first call. And so that's where we set those expectations up front to say, are we on the same page so that we're not wasting each other's time and that we can move forward clearly about the position and kind of move those things to the side. Some organizations are not going to do that, of course. So really take those cues through the process. I wouldn't, if they're not open and transparent with you up front, I would wait until you're actually in the interview process, following that first interview, and ask them questions about their compensation philosophy. So you may not come right out and say, how much does the position pay, but ask them about the philosophy of their compensation and benefit structure. If it's a nonprofit and they have a board, what is the agreement with the board about that philosophy? Do your homework. You can find out a lot about kind of what organizations can afford to pay by researching 990s, researching their financials if they have them posted. You can do a lot of that research ahead of time so that you're coming in informed when you have those conversations. One of the things that when we are to the point of negotiation with someone, if they are completely off base, that tells me that they have not done the research on the market. And so really pay attention to the market. There are things out there that are created by employees where employees often put false salaries into software systems. Don't pay attention to those because those are not going to help you get the right answers, but really do the research on the company's actual financial data. Ask people, ask your networks that you know people in these organizations. You don't have to ask them their salary, but you can ask them kind of where they pay to the market. Is it the median of the market? What is the compensation philosophy? What is the benefits philosophy? Oftentimes, companies will post their general benefits on their websites. So as far as benefits, that's something you can research.
Thank you so much, Ayana.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Do you, as an HR person in a museum, is it true that, and I'm a curator, so I'm curious about this, do you find it's true that different fields within the museum have different pay scales? Or does the museum generally have, kind of across the board sort of categories or things like that? Can you explain that?
They absolutely have different pay scales based on the budgets of the organizations. So it's based on that. What we do, I can share kind of our philosophy. Our philosophy is to pay wages that are competitive internally and externally with the market, not just the museum industry, but with the Bay Area market where we are for organizations of our size, our budget size, and our people size. So we partner with an outside compensation firm to look at the external market. We also evaluate where positions fall internally, and then we have a compensation structure that's based on various factors of that. I know for a fact that other museums have different compensation philosophies because I partner with the other HR people, and it's really up to that organization to determine their philosophy, but they are different. We also look at various salary surveys. AAMD has a survey that we all complete annually, but because of the different philosophies, there's different information going in, so you can't use that as a sole source. You do have to use a variety of surveys and data points to determine how to create that philosophy. But it is hard, I will say, especially in this Bay Area market, because we're all competing for the same wonderful talent out here. And depending upon the budget size and the philosophy of the organization, we may pay differently for similar jobs. And so it's really about the culture of the organization that you want to work for, your career growth, other benefits and opportunities that are available to you, and you have to make an informed decision.
Okay, great. Then, oh yeah.
I'd be interested, just in terms of whether to pose the question to the group or then also out into the room, but I kind of feel like there's another theme there, which I think is interesting for our field, which is that that I'm a development professional for the most part. I raise money. We generally end up being pretty well compensated. And, you know, and I think so also in terms of thinking about whether it's career choices and moving forward, that generally if you're often moving down a certain kind of administrative track, and especially on a development side or in a marketing side, you as an individual have a certain amount of value to the market to a certain degree. Like, I don't know what the forces are that are moving this, and I don't know if we also have a little bit more conversation about it. On the other hand, you know, we can actually be sometimes more well compensated than the people who are actually like the core, like curators or otherwise, in some cases, because those people have a very specialized skill and can't sort of get out as much, right? So I know, like, I have confronted moments at which where, you know, I'm in conversations with people who have, you know, PhDs and otherwise. I have an MBA. I've done a lot of school. I've got a lot of experience. But it's a little bit of a challenge. And I know also in our field, one of the operative terms is this question of parity, right? And I've actually sort of confronted that a lot throughout my career, also where I'd be at times at which I know to market I can make more money somewhere else, but that there are difficult decisions that need to be made within the organization because questions of parity become important because, honestly, I think we all know, and unfortunately, but I think the idea is this is an open conversation, our education teams, who are often sometimes the hardest working in the entire organization, and at risk of getting in trouble here, but probably for societal sexist reasons, are often the least compensated and sometimes the hardest working in the organization. So feeling like that was part of what your question was, like, are there different levels across the organization as well? I just think it's a question and an issue. Indeed, my sense is, though, the organizational charts and understanding of impact at the Oakland Museum is perhaps nationally one of the most informed and really sort of advanced thinking organizations. So I'd be a little curious whether some of those themes are things that you feel like you guys are honestly confronting.
Good. Where she's like, yes. So I wanted to move on to the next question, just in the interest of time. So this one's actually aimed at Gail, and thank you so much, James, for that. Work culture is a question that is often asked during interviews. How does one get a good, true sense, kind of a place's work culture? Is that even possible in a job interview?
Well, a lot of nuances in your question. Well, let me just first start by saying in the literature out there, they are now saying that work culture is the greatest determinant of the success of an institution. Patrick Leoncini, I brought the book with me. There are others that talk about it. It is really a measuring stick. And because I'm a consultant, I've had the experience of working with very toxic organizations and some that with a little bit of effort can become stronger. It's a little bit tough to your question, Brenda, but when I was thinking about tonight, a couple of thoughts, and I want to talk a little bit more about some other things you can keep in mind. With great discretion, you may have contacts at the institution where you might be applying, and you might be able to get some, if carefully, got to use extreme discretion, you might be able to get a little bit of a feel. Your questions have to always be very measured and diplomatic. You know, what's it like working there? Or just almost sound, I don't want to say sounding innocent, but very open and no judgmental tone on your end. Also, in the interview, how they comport themselves may tell you a lot. If the interview feels hurried, or the way that they're asking you the questions and you feel like you're being bombarded or attacked, well, I guess I would really ask myself, is this the kind of place where I would want to work? Other places will be very welcoming, make you feel very comfortable during the interview, and even if the interview goes well, you may get to the point where you almost feel like you're already working there, which gives you a sense of the culture. But culture is about values, it's about the way people work together, it's how decisions are made, it's about processes. And to somebody, when you were talking earlier, Kimmy, those are, you can ask, describe how people work together here at your institution. You can ask those, but let's be really honest, probably you're not going to know completely until you're in there. And there will be things that you'll pick up on after, once you're on board. It's a tough one. I think it's super important, and I think you need to ask yourself, what do you need to be successful? And if it needs to be a more nurturing or very highly supportive environment, then you should be very careful about where you put your application in. And if you're a tough cookie and it doesn't matter as much to you, then you know that about yourself. But that's that self-awareness that I think is really important to bring to the table. This is a huge topic. I can tell you one other thing, and then I'll see if anyone else wants to add. Did a panel in San Jose, I guess, I've lost track, when WMA was down there. And I also did another panel with another group of professionals up here. And by and large, what I found out is that this was not scientific, that a lot of places don't have it documented. It's kind of more osmosis, how they operate. I think it's really important to declare it. And you could also ask, I believe, you should have done your homework, what's the mission, the vision, values? They might even post something like organizing principles, like every voice in our institution matters. That's pretty great. It can look great on paper, but you want to know if it's real. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and we have like maybe 2 minutes for more. So go ahead.
One thing I was going to also offer, ask for a tour of the workspace. A lot of times people don't do that. And more and more people have been asking that, and it's great. We love that because you want to see where you're working. You can see as you're walking around how people are interacting. That tells you a lot there. And then I'll give you 2 questions you could ask in an interview. What excites you most about the culture of the organization? And what is one thing you would enhance about the culture of the organization? And so that's a great way to find out what may be broken without posing it in a negative way.
Great. And you had one, right? Yes. Okay.
That was great. I also wanted to add on to a helpful question that I find is asking what the leadership style is. It's a very curious but open question, and so people will choose to respond, and how you see their facial reaction is very helpful in terms of, is it overbearing? Are people open? Is it collaborative? You can pretty much feel the excitement or the dread initially. So I think that's a helpful question, not only asking someone that would be the direct manager of this role, but also the leadership in general of the organization.
And I think let's move on to the next section because that actually answered the general question. So great. So the next section is evaluation and raises, and I actually wanted to aim this at Sarah. In your experience in working with fellow EMPs, what are certain evaluation tips you wish you knew in the beginning?
Totally. I think my biggest piece of advice about evaluation, raises, performance reviews, all of those types of things is just knowing what the organization does around those types of things. So if you're interviewing, it could be something that you talk about in the interview process or very early on if you're hired. Because like we've kind of said, everywhere is different. I've worked places where there are no raises, there are no evaluations, or maybe they're based on performance. And I think just knowing those things from the get-go can really help shape what you do there, and you'll just be more prepared for those conversations. If you're going into a review, maybe you know that a raise is not even on the table and it's about performance. And I feel like just having that information from the get-go just, prevents a lot of awkward conversations. So yeah, that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Awesome. And then I wanted to ask kind of like general panelists, what are, your personal experiences in dealing with evaluations? Does anyone have any personal examples of that? No one? Any bad ones or any good ones? Like any evaluations or anything like that, like being evaluated, or do you have any other comments about evaluations?
I think I may be ruining the answer to the thing that I might be asked next, but I think that I feel like we have a tremendous problem in our across our industry that I don't think we really properly spend enough time with evaluations. And I think that the few times when I've either been in my role for long enough or any one place for long enough, they're essential. They're so terrific. One's own sense of self-evaluation and really trying to establish your own goals and then reaching against them is something that's really important. And the more I've spent in my own professional life, they're just a terrific tool. I feel like there's really only been one time that I found myself in a place where I was being evaluated, and I found it highly confrontational, and it was actually like a great learning lesson, because I felt like somebody was in a way like kind of in that moment using it against me. Like I was really excited I was getting an evaluation, and then I kind of felt like I got caught off guard in a way. And then it was one of these sort of like you can learn more from a bad manager than a good manager kind of thing, that I was like, I promise I will never do that to anybody ever again. And then instead always make sure that it's about shared contracts, shared goals. And then to a certain degree, I also kind of feel like to have it ever be about compensation is a little problematic, and it should almost never be tied to compensation. But there are HR professionals here, and I get myself in dangerous territory there.
I just want to add something quick. When you're hired, I think you should ask, what is the performance review process? For example, when you're hired, and Ayana can speak more to this, might be at the 3-month mark. Sometimes they call it probationary. Hopefully they've moved to a better term, that you can get a little bit of feedback. I'm in the middle of coaching a board, because I work a lot with boards and trustees, and the evaluation process, I believe, at least at the executive level, should be co-created with the board and the CEO, so everyone understands how it's put together, and that it a year before it's executed. And I think that picks up a little bit on what James has been saying. I also really think it's important for you to be able to, a good performance review in my mind is allowing the individual to put forth their own self-evaluation. It has been my experience when I've been doing it, 9 times out of 10, everything, they've already put it out on the table. And usually I've had to say, I really think you have underestimated how well you have done in here, and here, and here. And I might agree with that one point you made, that might be something we could work on, or I'd like you to work on this year. But it shouldn't be a mystery. It shouldn't be a dreaded process. It's very important. But I'm going to pass it to you.
I'll make it quick.
No, we have some time.
Okay. So I will say this has been the biggest challenge of my career. Honestly, this shift to performance management in this industry at the museum has been the biggest challenge, because performance management is less about the process or the forms or whatever you're doing. It's more about the conversation and the alignment of goals and the achievement or the development of the individual. It's coaching up, it's coaching down, it's coaching sideways. It's more about that process, and people get really caught in what is my score, how are others being evaluated, is it fair? And it's less about that. It's really about, are you communicating with each other? Are you on the same page towards the achievement of the priorities of the institution in which you work? So that you're not just working for work's sake, you're working towards the achievement of something and you're moving that ship forward. So that has been a huge culture shift for us. I implemented a performance process. We call it performance in motion because we're moving forward about a year and a half ago. And so we use a technology solution for this, which allows individuals to have communication any day of the week through the technology solution. So you're not losing things via email. I encourage people, whatever your goals are, you know you're doing more than just what your 3 to 5 core goals are. They have to have some outcome measurements. So it's not just you're doing a task. That's not a goal. You're doing the task. To what end are you doing that task? That's what you're being measured on. And everything else you can put in that tool as well and share all of your wonderful accomplishments, all of the areas that you want to develop for your current role, for the next role that you want. It's really a communication tool. And so it's important for people to have kind of that shift in mindset. We don't even use scores. We use words, and we've had iterations of this. We did scores, and people freaked out, and now we use words, and they're like, well, what does that word mean? So we're still kind of moving through this process, but I really emphasize it's about the communication, and it's about working together towards the achievement of some outcome that is moving the full institution forward and moving you individually forward in your career. So if you shift your mindset, it can work.
I just want to add, there should be ongoing communication and evaluation throughout the year, so it's not this no feedback and then boom, you've got this, intimidating review process. So hopefully there's that back and forth ongoing throughout the year.
The other thing I wanted to ask too is, are there, for individually, are there ways that we can can we document tasks, or how would we kind of go prepared into an evaluation or something like that? Because tracking out, do we track hours? What do we do?
I can speak to that. One of the things that I encourage people to do in our tool, but you can do it in a Word doc, a Google doc, however you want to track it. All of the accomplishments, it's really not the task, it's the accomplishments, the outcome goals, what you're actually doing to move your work forward. Keep a log of it. And when you've finished that, put what that result was. And just keep a running log of that for yourself. And so when you go into your one-on-one meetings, and hopefully you're having those on a regular basis, you can have an agenda. And I would recommend you come with an agenda to those meetings and say, I want to talk about what I've accomplished. I want to talk about what are the areas that I may need some assistance with, goals that are not on track, and why they are not, or things that you've found that you've gone over and above on. Share that. It's important to share that continuously, but keep that running log.
Yeah, and then I wanted to actually pass it to Kimmy really quick, and then I'll...
Thank you. And to add on to that, because that's great feedback, and one of the things that's very simple to help you keep organized as you log or document this is to kind of look at where am I now, what do I want to accomplish in 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, how is this going to build to my long-term plan? And really having a transparent conversation with your manager is key, because they're a big part of your development, but you have to be the most proactive person in seeing those through. And this is about self-advocacy, so you have to be outspoken and directive of what you want and how you want to develop.
Quick sidebar. In working with organizations, I have sometimes asked staff, when we're looking at organizational culture and structure, to look at their job description and ascribe percentage of time on what they're asked to do, and including those things that they do that are not on it, and the things that are on it that they never get to. It is incredibly, can be very illuminating, and it could be an interesting point of conversation in your review, and could maybe lead toward promotion, better, a raise in your salary. Anyway,
Just a thought.
And then I wanted to kind of, and I know, James, you already kind of answered the question I was going to ask you, which was, you know, as a senior level director, can you talk about a time when you asked for a raise during an evaluation? When did it go well, or when did it kind of not go well? And you kind of went into that, but did you want to expand on that a little bit, or?
Sure, I guess. For me, I mean, I tried to think a lot about this particular question, and it comes back around to, I think this is kind of one of the greatest challenges in our industry. Also, just because I think longevity is a real issue with most of our organizations. Frankly, I mean, I think really compensation is a major issue across our entire industry, and I feel like for the most part, any amount of change in salary that I've seen for myself, for the most part, or for others that I work with, usually have to do with some juncture of change or rupture or change in positions. For myself, I mean, I think probably, but again, like for some reason, I have this vision that like the Oakland Museum is this sort of wonderfully informed place that like has people that stay for longer and actually has like levels and stuff, and is in some way informed by the kind of government processes that I worked at the Metropolitan Museum in New York for about 8 years or so. It was super regimented. You had levels, and there were ranges for salaries at particular levels. And if you went from a 14 to a 15, you went from 14 to 15, and you got a specific amount of change in salary and all those things. I haven't worked in another organization like that in the rest of my career. So with that, the times at which really I felt like, it was time for me to make more money, it usually meant it was time for me to go somewhere else. Just from my personal experience and my personal stories, that's what I'd say, with the exception of the time when I was working in one of the largest, perhaps oldest, and most stable museums in the United States. And I know also, the Art Institute in Chicago and a couple other places have systems that are as well informed as that. If Oakland doesn't, please don't tell me. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think a lot of the bigger museums have those kind of, I don't know what to call them, salary tiers, but I agree with you. I think that the time when you're most likely to get a raise is when you're changing jobs or getting a promotion, aside from kind of maybe a cost of living increase or something very kind of small. But to further that point, I guess what I would encourage people to do is to think about what they can do in their current job to get them to the next job. So like so rather than focusing on like, God, I really need more money, focusing on like, I really need more responsibility. I really need to be able to, curate my own show or do a book or, whatever the project is in your particular field of museum work to get you to the next job, because that's really what you're there for. You're really there to get that experience so that then you can hopefully move on.
Yeah,
Okay, I'd like to make just one point, and you may not want to hear this, but really think about your career path, because sometimes you may take a position to gain experience that will take you further in your career, but you may need to take a pay cut to do that. So you may move to another organization to gain a new skill set, take a pay cut, gain that skill set, and then it moves you 2 or 3 levels ahead of where you were or what your original trajectory might have been. I've done that 3 times in my career. I've made really strategic moves, even coming to the Oakland Museum, I'll be honest. I took a pay cut to come because I wanted to be at the museum, and there was a certain skill set and opportunity that I wanted to take advantage of. So it's not always about the pay, and I know it's hard to hear that, especially here in the Bay Area. However, it's being really strategic about your career and the skill set that you want to gain. And it will pay off eventually if you're strategic about it. So.
excellent. And yeah, we have some time.
just one other thing to add is I think there's a big issue across our industry, and honestly, because I love what I do, right? And I think that's also what goes along with this is, for me, in a lot of ways, the compensation is actually just the profound satisfaction of having a job that I love every single day. That indeed, my avocation is my vocation. Like at one point, like if I won the lottery, I think I'd keep going to work. And I think it's really, really, really important to me. Having said that, I think more recently it's come to my mind in terms of doing a decent amount of hiring or looking for my next thing and otherwise, where immediately when you're getting into the interview process, and maybe it's also about promotions, where people say, what do you currently make? And also, like, I have this challenge as somebody who's hiring, and like, how do you establish what salary expectations are? And I read an article 2-3 years ago about talking about how much of a sort of insult that is, that so much of the nonprofit industry, that at some point, at some stage, you say, what are you presently making? And then really it's often a matter of trying to negotiate that person down or otherwise. But instead, over the last couple of years, I always talk now about salary expectations. And I think also in terms of your own sense of coming into this, that as you're looking into that next place or otherwise, also holistically, and what's your philosophy behind it, but that you don't think about like, what do I currently make or what do I want to make, but also like, what are your salary expectations? What do you want to achieve, and maybe it's lower, through what you want to make by way of being able to continue to do work that you love and find deeply satisfying. And it's about that language shift for me, about like not what you currently make, but what are your salary expectations? And now I never ask somebody what do they make, but I say what are their salary expectations?
It's very interesting. Thank you very much. I think we can actually just move on to the next section, which is actually exit interviews. So exciting. And I actually have this one aimed also at Ayana. This is the first one. And then we'll balance it off afterwards. So why are exit interviews, valuable in HR? Like, what are they for? what are key experiences or comments that HR organizations, take into consideration for change?
Yeah, they're so important, and I wish more organizations would do them. From an internal perspective, it really helps you to understand what are some of the key risks that are happening in your organization, so where people may not have felt like they could come forward before, and oftentimes they're freer to share in an exit interview. You're also giving that person an opportunity to get some things off their chest, whether they're positive or not so positive, and so they feel like they have a voice. Anyone who leaves your organization should be an ambassador for your organization, whether they're with you or not. So oftentimes you're able to resolve some of the things that may have been misconceptions and really turn them around. You're able to continue those relationships, because oftentimes they're either going to refer future employees to you or honestly badmouth you. So you're able to kind of catch that ahead of time. The information that they give you, you can really use to guide the organization. But just as important as exit interviews are, I think stay interviews are even more important. And so that is when you ask the people who are at your organization why they stay. There's some pointed questions that you ask to keep them engaged, so you don't get to the point of an exit interview unnecessarily. Sometimes it's important for a person to move on, and it's not a bad thing if a person moves on to grow their career. But it's important to do the stay interviews. And a lot of organizations don't have capacity to do them every year, or to do them for all employees. A great way to start that process is to work with managers, and if they see that there's an employee that is a solid employee that may show signs that they're starting to disengage, that's a really great time to catch them before they're fully disengaged.
I would ask for one if it isn't part of the culture. Yeah. And I just caution that when you're having your candid final conversation, don't throw anybody under the bus. Don't burn any bridges. Take the high road and phrase your questions. Might have been helpful if, it's how you your composure and your professionalism is going to then lead to great references, and certainly that's a good time to say, may I return to you for a letter of recommendation or as a reference as I move through my career.
I was just going to add that I think one of the most important things when you're leaving an organization is writing a good resignation letter, writing something that's positive, thanking the people for the that you work, your boss, for the opportunities that you've been given, because that goes into your file. And so 5 years later, however many years later, even if your boss isn't at that organization, somebody's going to go back to that. You're looking for, you're interviewing for another job, and they're going to check your references, and somebody's going to go back to your file and see this letter there. You don't want it to be like, I hated my job, and that's why I'm leaving, and everything here was horrible. But now, 5 years later, you really need them to give you this reference. You want to leave on good terms. And I think one question that I would pose to the HR people here is, how candid should you be in that exit interview? I mean, it's something that as a person who has done exit interviews before with HR staff, not necessarily with the boss that you worked with, but with an HR person who you're supposed to be able to be candid with, like how candid should you really be? So I'm curious.
Yeah. Did you want to go?
Excuse me. That's a great question. I had an exit interview today, actually. So they can go in any direction, but actually it's really important to be very candid, but word choice is important. Like you mentioned, taking the high road. You can notify if it's your HR partner that you're having the exit interview with, or another partner. I would definitely let them know of like obstacles, roadblocks, certain behaviors that is creating dysfunction in a team, because it's really an opportunity. So for me as an HR partner, if I'm hearing this, it's an opportunity for me to give coaching and do a climate survey of the team and understand like what's really going on, because this is notifying me that there's a problem, and instead of letting chaos occur and more people leave, it's an opportunity for me to nip it in the bud, change direction, increase morale. So, talent is really important, and you want to keep your people, but you don't want them to be suffering. So I think being candid is important, but also how you phrase things is important too, because you also want to keep a positive relationship.
I meant to add that not only might your employer be your reference down the road, but you may also want to come back to that institution. There aren't a lot of museums, and many of us will find ourselves back. I've worked for the Oakland Museum twice in my career, actually. So, there will be times when you may end up back at the same place at a different level or in a different job. So you want to maintain that kind of clean relationship.
Yeah, and I had another kind of follow-up question aimed at the entire panel. So for those that do not have an HR department, how does an institution create closure when an employee resigns or leaves? And being in museums, being in nonprofits, I'm sure many of you have experienced museums or nonprofits that don't have an HR department. So what do you do? Does anyone have any suggestions?
I'm sorry, this is not going to be particularly positive. I think most don't. Has been my experience, and it usually falls to the director, and he or she typically doesn't have training in HR. So I've worked with institutions where they had access to an HR agency to help. It's very difficult because there's a whole, we've got two HR people here. There's a whole process and a way that you do this that is both tied to legal issues and really fairness. So I always cringe a little bit because a lot of institutions really don't have it, and they don't value it. It's one of the last positions to be added, even in sizable institutions where you would assume they have it.
And we have, let's see. I wanted to ask the next question then, unless anyone has any other comments about that. No? Okay, cool. So, in your personal experience, and this is aimed at Erin actually, in your personal experience from relocating jobs, how did you rebuild your network that could help those in the audience? Like any suggestions in rebuilding a network from scratch or building one?
Well, I moved from LA. I moved from the Bay Area to Los Angeles at a time when for personal reasons, and then I moved again from Los Angeles back to the Bay Area again for personal reasons, and I both times left pretty good jobs, really good jobs, and it was hard. It is really important to build a network when you move to a new place without a job. But luckily, Los Angeles and San Francisco aren't that far apart. My field is relatively small, so I was able to build upon the network that I already had. My network kind of touched the people in LA and vice versa. So I think actually, in a way, coming back was a little harder because, going to a new place, you kind of have a reason to reach out to people. Hey, I'm new in town. You can send an email to somebody you maybe know, or I'm moving to the city, to Los Angeles, and you know me from meetings that we've had in San Francisco, but now I'm going to be in your city. So, in a way, it was kind of easier. And coming back is a little harder. It's like trying to rekindle connections, with people that you've known for maybe from a while back. So I think it's just, you kind of have to be outgoing and put yourself out there maybe a little more than you necessarily want to or are comfortable with or would normally do. But so I don't know, if you're going somewhere very far-flung, you just have to ask your boss, ask people that that might be able to help you to kind of forge those connections and talk to people.
And then actually, let me ask Sarah, because you're the EMP president, and I wanted to ask, from your own personal experience, any suggestions on how to rebuild or build a network?
Yeah, absolutely. Generally speaking, I would just say get involved. Attend things like this event tonight with Museum Workers Speak. Attend emerging museum professional events, and there's organizations and associations. Oh my gosh, I can't speak. Associations for whatever department you're interested in working for. There's archivist groups. There's you name it. Like there's something that would cater to your interests. So I would seek those organizations out and get involved with them, attend their events, and ask how you can do more for them if you want to pursue that path. Another thing I would recommend is attend conferences. That's an awesome place where you can go and you learn about things that you don't even know exist. You're like, oh my gosh, this is great. And it's an awesome opportunity to attend any session that is outside of your wheelhouse and learn about other things. And you meet people from all over the state, all over the region, all over the nation, and then you build your network like Erin was talking about. If you do move somewhere else, you might have that person you can reach out to when you're in a new area.
Awesome. And then you, Ayana,
Just to build on that, if you have capacity, volunteer in the community, because then you'll meet people and you never know what the connections are. And they could be in or out of your industry, but you're just meeting people in the community. Also conduct informational interviews. So once you start meeting people, just ask them for an informational interview and then ask them for 2 or 3 other people they think you should speak with. And just that will help build that network, and keep a log of that and keep in contact with them. Even if it's once a year, just so when you do need them for something, it doesn't feel like you're only contacting them because you need them. There is some tie, so you are keeping some sort of connection, even if you just have a calendar and a binder and you say, once a year I'm going to reach out to these people.
Yeah, I think I think volunteer work and internships are really important. I can honestly say that I have never done an internship or a volunteer stint that didn't end up leading somewhere. It might not have led somewhere right away, like it didn't necessarily mean that I interned and then I got a job right after, but almost every volunteer internship I did, somewhere later on down the road, it came into play in some important way in the next step of my career. So I think that's really important. I also think just, sometimes if you move somewhere, you have to just take something, the museum world is social. So you can build, luckily, on kind of those social opportunities to get yourself, networked or better connected to people. And I took a gallery job when I first moved to LA, and it was just a part-time thing. And, I knew it was going to be temporary. Literally, in the first week I was at that job, I was at a dinner party with the woman who would become my boss at the Getty like 6 months later. So it's like, you just have to do these things. You have to get yourself dressed and go to dinner even though you don't really want to or you don't like your job or whatever. You got to do it because your boss is going to, your future boss might be at that dinner. And so it's just like the more things you do, the better your chances are that you're going to build something for yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the museum field is small. Like when you meet people at things like this event tonight, like you will probably cross paths with them again, and they might be your boss. You might interview with them, and just having that personal connection beforehand with people in the field is super valuable.
I was just going to say, keep your contacts. Stay connected to, if you're, to use your example, you're in San Francisco, now you're down in LA, reach back up to them. I am still in touch with my first boss, decades, I'm not going to tell you how many, ago. I have colleagues I have also known for decades, and there are people I can call when I have an issue or I want to troubleshoot or, just want someone who knows me and cares about me and respects me, and I know I'll get an honest answer. And then just one thing. One of my dearest friends in the field lived in New York, and every Friday we had a coffee date. So she had the better end of the deal because I got up at 6, so that it was 9 for her, and we would talk. Sometimes it wouldn't be even for very long. We'd talk about issues in the field and stayed connected. It was a treasure, totally wonderful. It's just an idea.
Just the only other, yes to all of those things for sure. And the only other thing that I think also comes to my mind is as you think about your own career path, that I think there's also a way that, or at least I kind of feel like in a lot of ways this is what I've done for most of my life, is like just sort of visualize where you want to be. And then also if you're coming to a new town, if that's what the scenario is, or if there are people here who are recent to the Bay Area, that, a little bit like the story that Aaron was telling, just like visualize where you want to be. Like if you want to work at SF MoMA, then go to SF MoMA, start introducing yourself to people. Like, I mean, maybe don't be too creepy, but be maybe actually like a little creepy, and just feel free to walk up and be like, hey, how you doing? And what are you doing here? And do you like your job? And, is there a job board? And are there openings? And we're all in the same field, to be like if you're a farmhand and you want work, you go hang out on the edge of the fence and wait till somebody finds you, and that like to a certain degree you really can do that because then people will say, well, there is a job board, or we're having this thing this evening, or if you stick around and maybe you'll meet some people, and then you're there for long enough, and then all of a sudden there's your future boss at the Getty. And it really can work that easily, that if you just visualize where you want to be, and to a certain degree it's partly how eventually I found a job when I first moved out here, and it was just I wanted to be where I was going to be. Didn't exactly work out at that pace, but I just went to people and said, you need to talk to me and I need to talk to you, and I got different interviews at different levels and eventually got to exactly what I wanted at the Fine Arts Museums. And if you just sort of visualize where you want to be, you can make it happen.
Well, I will say that I also have never gotten a job that I didn't have some sort of personal connection to. Like, I've never cold applied for a job, gotten an interview, been in there, didn't know anybody, and it's almost always like somebody wrote me a recommendation, or I knew somebody already at the organization, or I had some history with that organization, or had previously met somebody. That's just how it works. I mean.
And have you found that perhaps that's indicative of the current job market, or is that always been, or is it just museums?
I think it's because I'm a curator. I mean, I know for sure that's not how the corporate world works, but I'm curious how some of the other fields within the museums, I don't know if that's how it works for you in development, for example, but I know as a curator that's, you're at the bottom of a pile of like 80 people for one job, and they're, the only way that they're going to notice you is if they kind of already know who you are.
I think across the board we're in the helping people industry. I mean, I think it's like hospitals, except hospitals actually require a certain different kind of certification and training at different times. I mean, we're all here to help each other. That's what we're dedicated to. We're all dedicated to making the world a better place. So at least I know for myself, if I'm meeting anybody who's coming to me and saying, I'm in your industry and I want to be part of how you help people, then my immediate reaction is, hey, somebody get over here. We got to figure out how we can get this person helping us help others, And I think to a certain degree that goes across our industry. In certain areas, you know, is a curatorial sometimes more competitive than others, and intellectual property or other things, but those kind of barriers are breaking down. And but you know, I think really, like, if you found almost any one of us are institutions and walked right up to them and said, you know, hey, I want to work here, they'd probably respond to say, let me figure out how I can help you. Give me your information, or you know, and start to engage. Although Ayana is a
Oh, yes, you wanted to.
I just quickly want to add, find a mentor. You know, someone that wants to hear how you're doing, and I mean, it doesn't even have to be that formal. You know, you can reach out and say, hey, just could I talk to you for half an hour, and then sometimes really lovely bonds happen, and those relationships go on for a long time. And that person might read your application, you know, your job application. They might look at your resume. Who knows? So.
And I had one more question too before we kind of open it up for questions. We're ending a little earlier, but the one thing that I was kind of curious about was what's it called? How do you want people to approach you? Because I know, you know, you've all been in the field for a long time, you know, a lot of you. But if someone reaches out to you as a contact, I always feel nervous. I'm like, how do I approach this person? I always feel kind of intimidated and needy. But how do you prefer someone to approach you to ask for a connection? Do you have any suggestions?
I can speak to that. I don't want to hog the mic here. But I really like, I mean, I will say there are some people in the audience who have approached me here who have been really lovely. And, you know, they've come to events like this and they've said, you know, I appreciated what you said. Can we have coffee? Can we have an informational interview? Do you have a few minutes for a phone conversation? I'm interested in this position. Can you tell me more? It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be really formal. You know, we are in the business of helping. Hopefully we all love the work that we do, and we want to share it, and we want to help others grow in it. So as long as you're approaching in a, you know, nice, respectful way and are, you know, flexible and understanding about schedules, it's fine. Just reach out.
I would say email can help because everybody has busy schedules, and a nice thoughtful little email, and then you find a time, and then I always feel better prepared. I've got the time set aside to really focus on them versus feeling a little hurried because I'm about to go into a conference call or something. So it's just a little courtesy.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking. Is like, what's a courtesy, you know?
But, and also just to reinforce, amongst all these things, to reinforce one of Gail's points from earlier about mentors or networks and stuff, really, to a certain degree, the best way you can ever hear from somebody is through a reference. I mean, so that if you can have somebody set that introduction. By introduction, you almost can't say no. By the time I'm hearing from Ayana saying, you know, you should talk to Brenda, then I can't say no. And so, indeed, like, right, of course, like, I guess naturally or whatever, that's the best way to hear from somebody is through somebody else, however often you can set that up, just as a one thing. But again, all of the scenarios are right, but just one of the approaches.
Yeah. Well, I think we are through our questions, so I wanted to really open it up to the audience and see, like, what questions all of you had. So are there... I'm just going to have you raise your hand and then say your question out loud, very, very loudly, so that we can hear you. And then I'll have the panelists, because we're recording this, I want to make sure that the question is heard. I can't pull the mic all the way out there. So I'll have the panelists kind of repeat the question, whoever wants to answer it, okay? So let's open it up. Yes.
I have a question about the interview process. I think one of the questions that I struggle with the most is, what are your weaknesses? Because you want to be candid, but you don't really want to give away what, you know, that you're a terrible employee or what have you. So how would you best answer what are your weaknesses while still being honest?
I just have to say, have that answer ready. I had someone in an interview say procrastination. Needless to say, that killed it. I mean, I was I kept up with the interview, but, you know, but you also don't want it to be gratuitous, so you really want it to be genuine, but, you know, don't throw yourself under the bus.
And that was in response to a question of like, what are our weaknesses? Yes. And then did anyone else have?
I can say, have an example of how you are overcoming that weakness. So, we don't ask, what is your weakness? We ask, are there any areas that you would like to develop based on this role? What are the areas that you would need further support or mentorship, or what is that? And then just be honest about that and give examples of how you would approach that.
Awesome. Anyone else want any comment? Yeah.
I would just want to reinforce the fact that I just think it's a really, really terrific and essential question, because indeed it is one of the main things that totally catch you off guard, and your ability to answer, like often, like, how are the 3 things that you would be described? People have ways to frame that. And it can totally catch you off guard. So to figure out the thoughtful and fair way to assess your own capacities and really to have it prepared so that question never catches you off guard. Because if you're going for something really serious, it can sink you.
Okay, so next question. Who had another one? Did you have another one? Or okay, yeah, go ahead.
I did. It's about resumes as part of the job application process. If there were things that you looked for in a resume, when I've applied to jobs before, sometimes they're really structured, and sometimes it's just categories of things that you'd like to hear. But are there things that have really stood out about certain resumes or things that you've looked for?
So what have you looked for or what has stood out in a resume?
Well, I don't know if this totally answers your question in terms of like categories or designing the resume or whatever, but I will tell you, you should proofread and then proofread it again and then have somebody else proofread it, because there is nothing that sinks your job, your application, than a crappy cover letter and a misspell. It's just, you gotta proofread it.
Easy to read, visually accessible, very carefully thought out structure, categories, and then consistency, which is kind of akin to what was just said about proofreading, so that the dates are all the same and they're consistent. You don't say March, blah, 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 and then the next time it's all numbers, So, and you should think about having different resumes for different jobs that you apply for.
And to add on to that, I also think if you are applying for a creative role, and based on your experiences that you've had, a portfolio is always very helpful because it really shows like what you've worked on and like also your development of what you've done and how that has morphed. I think people really appreciate that because they can see an example of what you do.
And then actually, I wanted to go on to next question. So I know, did you raise your hand or?
I did.
Oh yeah, I'll ask. Yeah.
I had 2 questions about the salary when you were talking earlier about that. So, Ayana, specifically, if you could talk more about when you were talking about compensation philosophy, what would be an answer to that question? Just if you could expand on that idea and what that would encompass. And then the second part is, could you guys talk in general a little bit about, we brought up parity, but like gender parity, for example. I'm in conservation and we have done a lot of surveys. AAM has done surveys. I have a lot of data going into an interview and I don't know how to present that. If you're negotiating a salary, how do you present that information in a way that doesn't seem defensive, but at the same time does advocate for yourself and where we know we are in our field today?
I'm going to take it a little backwards. I actually spent most of the day today at a labor law seminar. And one of the stats that they shared there was that, in general, women negotiate 7% of the time when offered a job, and men negotiate 57% of the time. Everyone should negotiate, bottom line. The organization may not be able to move the dial based on their budget or their compensation structure, et cetera, on the actual salary, but there's always something that you can negotiate. So you should really, again, do your homework, figure out what they pay, what their budget size is, kind of what positions are available, ask for an org chart if you can ahead of time to see kind of what levels they have, if it's a flat organization, really how they're structured, and that will help you in that. When people ask about our compensation philosophy, again, it's that we're competitive, with internal equity and external market competitive, that we align with our budget, and that we are compliant with all federal, state, and local laws. And another piece that we add to that is we don't align annual compensation with performance. And so we say that up front so that people know that we have a different structure for that, but it is not aligned with that. We have a compensation structure that is solely aligned with those 3 bullet points. And so, really understanding that when you go into an interview, because then you'll know how the culture works, as well as you'll know, once you get the job, how to negotiate your salary, because it's not, you don't do it at a time when you're doing your performance review. You know that that's not the culture of the organization, so you do it at a different time based on their organization. Did I answer everything? Does somebody else want to answer?
Did she answer the second? Okay, cool. So no one else has a comment? All right, so let's move on. And I think you in the blue, what was your question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any tips on ways to stand out in a phone interview to kind of get your foot in the door and make it to the next step of the interview.
Good one. Kimmy, you got it?
Nothing. I think phone interviews are really hard. It's because it's really hard to read the person that you're talking to. I can remember one that didn't go very well for me, that I just didn't get the guy that I was talking to, and therefore I don't think that he got me. And so I think they're really hard. I don't know. I'd be looking for tips too.
Some people do Skype interviews. I do executive search, so that isn't perfect either. And if you end up doing that, make sure you have a great, solid background behind you, not with the window, and then wear something that, sorry to sound, but that you feel good in and doesn't make you look washed out. But they're tough too. They're the technology.
I'll speak to it. I was hoping somebody else would. I'll give a couple of points because we do these a lot. One of the things is really pay attention to the instructions. Hopefully the person who's doing the phone interview will give you some instructions as to the process, the timeline that you're going to have. They may say, we expect this to take 30 minutes. Pay attention to that. So make your answers concise so that they align with that. They may tell you, I have 5 questions. So in your mind, pace what your answers are going to be so that you don't lose that time and you're able to really get across the main points that you want. And oftentimes they'll ask you if you have questions at the end. Even be prepared with questions for phone screens.
3 things that come to my mind, which just have to do with personal experience. I haven't read them validated in a book or heard from somebody else, but I think one of the things is, and they're generally the same kinds of things you'd also want to be doing in person, but ask questions, draw in the interviewer. Sometimes I feel like when you're on the phone, you make the mistake of feeling like you have a microphone in your hand. The ability to pause and ask a question, because you find that, as with anything, the more you get that person to actually participate, the more it's a memorable experience for them. The other thing that sometimes I'll often do is remind people that this is a phone conversation, and that I'm a person who gestures a lot and otherwise, so often, whether it's for an interview or other kinds of dialogues, to say like, you're not seeing what I'm, not to say that you're not seeing what I'm doing right now, there are other ways to say it, but to remind them that, you should know that, like, if we were seeing each other in person, and perhaps almost allow them to create images in their mind, like that create ways to say that, like, you can't see me gesturing right now, or I wish you could see me smile. And really communicate a certain kind of visualness to them so that they start to create images in their mind. And then for me, the other thing is pause. That you don't, often again, like you feel like you start to get nervous or you get a microphone in your hand and you have to keep talking. Every once in a while, literally just stop. And then in the conversation, it allows them to fill that space if they want to, and then also just to remind yourself that you have to just stop and allow the thoughts to form for yourself and for the listener, and then move on. Don't just keep talking. Just a couple suggestions, and they don't really come from anything other than just personal experience.
So, any other questions in the audience that we have? Yes, you.
I have a question about the resignation process. Erin, you briefly mentioned a resignation letter. But I was wondering if any of you had any other tips about when to start the resignation process and how to go through with that when it's a job you're really attached to, but you have to leave.
Are you sort of asking like how long and how far in advance you need to give notice and things like
Far
that?
in advance and this word choice too. You mentioned word choice.
I think giving a lot of notice is really important. I mean, if it's a professional job for you and a place that you care about and want to possibly come back to or have a reference from, I think giving a lot of notice is really important. Sometimes you can't. You know, sometimes you don't have that luxury because you need to start another job or something has happened in your life and you really can't. But if you can, giving 2 months notice, I think is pretty, but I don't know, other industries feel differently, but I've given a month notice before and have been like, looked at like, are you kidding me? But I mean, I think if you have projects pending, I'm a curator, so often I'll have projects that are way out. I have to give a lot of notice. Word choice. I don't know if I have anything to say about word choice. Maybe other people do.
That's where the edit, rewrite. I actually respectfully disagree. I think it may tie into the nature of your work that would require maybe a little more time because you're in the middle of trying to conclude a project or something. But by and large, many positions, 2 weeks' notice is completely acceptable. When you're at higher level, I would say a month, maybe 6 weeks. It's tough. People start to, it's the lame duck thing. And not only is it hard for the people around you, but then it becomes hard for you because, and my heart's going out to you. I don't know if this is about something that's about to happen or whatever, but so it's very personal. You're with a position that at an institution, and you have a position you love, but it's weird. The psychology of it, you want to be, I think, pretty careful, and you might even want to negotiate how much time would be positive for all concerned. Did you want to?
No, I mean, you said it.
You good? Okay.
In terms of word choice, I think an important piece of it is actually like the voice of gratitude. And so like showing appreciation for the opportunity, your development, what you've learned, and also after having this conversation with your manager, it's important to set expectations for how is this going to be communicated to the team or the organization. A lot of times, at least in my organization, before an official note goes out, the person usually goes to their direct team members and tells them directly, like one-on-one in a private setting, and then that then goes out to like the larger team, and it usually comes for the manager. But definitely talk to your manager first before anyone else, because you don't want to create any negative spin that would turn your resignation into a negative thing. So I think that's important.
And thank you, question asker. Yes, in the back here with the scarf.
Hey, I was wondering if you guys had any tips about if you ever come to a point in your career where you've had a space of time, whether that was like raising a family or medical or just some reason you lived somewhere where you didn't have a museum or something, how you kind of address that in an interview, or how you make that look okay on a resume, or how you explain that and make it seem like a positive or
How do you explain the gap?
I think it depends upon the gap. So it depends on what you were doing during that gap and the culture of the organization that you're interviewing with. You can always, be yourself and be honest. If you were going to school, or if you took time off to raise a family, or you just needed some time to explore what your career options may be. you were in the transition in life. If you were doing some volunteer work during that time, or involved in an organization, or helping in some other way and gaining some new skills, it's important to say, this is what I was doing during that time frame, to fill that gap, to say that, you know, you were still doing something relevant to the work that you're hoping to move into, if that's the situation. But I think it all depends. There's no blanket answer as far as I'm concerned.
I guess I would say that the hardest time to deal with that is when you're just coming off of a gap and maybe like you moved or something and you don't have a job and you've been kind of waiting for a job. That's kind of the hardest time. It seems like it's a lot easier when it's in the past, because the way that you structure your resume, you can make it seem less significant if there really isn't something to put, like a volunteer position in that slot. Or the way that you kind of date things. You know, you can, in 2005, I was doing this, but instead of saying like it was only from April to May, you know what I mean? Like you can kind of minimize it a little bit on your resume, or put that slot in like the volunteer section and not right up at the top, so that so that's not like striking. But when you're just coming off of a gap, it's a little bit harder. You do have to kind of explain it, and hopefully you have something like a volunteer or a significant personal situation that you can point to.
When consultants have gaps, we write books.
So there you go. Write a book is the answer. I'm going to take one more question, and then we'll have closing remarks, and then we'll disperse. One more question? I know you had. Yes.
If no one else has one. I would like to preface this by saying I know this is a very nice problem to have, but I would still love to hear your thoughts. I'm wondering how to facilitate a constructive conversation during a performance review. In my case, I report directly to a very supportive but very hands-off board. So when I present kind of a self-evaluation, they say, yes, great, we did it. All right, that's the review, that's done. So how can I ask for more feedback in a way where, it's clear that I want constructive feedback, and they also feel comfortable actually sharing it? Sorry, I'm looking at you, Gail.
I could see that. Yeah. Well, first of all, we could talk a little bit more during the break, but they can't just pass it off so lightly. You deserve more. You're the executive director, right, of an institution. So helping them understand how it's important to you and your work, and it's important to them. It's funny, I've been going through my own little bookshelf, and even the literature for reviews equates the ED CEO evaluation along with the board self-evaluation, which that is a whole other conversation. But I think you deserve more, and I think you could prepare perhaps either some resources, but prepare and let them know what's helpful for you. And so you're educating them. You're in a position of you're educating up. But we can talk a little more during the break.
It could be applicable if there's a manager,
Yeah.
I'd also like to say, if you have an HR department, have an HR person, you don't. So I would follow her advice. But for organizations that do, you could almost pass it off to the HR person and say, this is what we're doing institutionally, and I'd like to align with that. And so my HR person is going to work with you, board, to create a process that aligns with the institution or with the bylaws. So if you look at your bylaws, because your bylaws might require it. So then you can use the bylaws as an excuse to make sure that they're following through.
I think I'd also just add, like, sort of be careful what you wish for, I mean, I think one of the things is you may be in like an absolutely perfect situation, and if from your own experience as an executive now in the organization and knowing what the measurables are, where you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be delivering, and if you feel like you've done a fair assessment of those things and you're doing a good job, you may not really want to be getting more involved in pushing your board further if they don't have further fiscal responsibilities, that that they're underperforming, all the things that Gail's saying about having those two things running in parallel. And if you don't have any of those things, then really be careful what you wish for. And I think and more though, to that point, is if what you're looking for is an effective dialogue, then, then look to your networks and look to your mentors and those relationships, and go to a colleague and peer and say, how do you think I'm doing? If what you're really looking for is creative feedback and constructive ways to push yourself further, you may want to find it somewhere else, because it could be that if you want to force that dialogue into a different place, it may go in all the wrong directions for you and the organization.
You could also document what you've done over the past year, and just as a document to share with them. And, then you're really taking this, the high road. You're saying, here are some things that we talked about, and this is what I've been able to do. These are things I want to continue to work on. And then there's something that documents. So that would be nice for you to have, at least that.
Would you recommend that she add a board member who might be able to provide that kind of critique? To add a person to her board? I mean, if she's the executive director, would you advocate her adding somebody to the board that could provide that kind of critique? Or with ED experience that might have a better handle on how to critique what she's doing? I'm just curious if that would be something.
Building a board, that's like a whole huge conversation. It's valid. It might, just to close out fairly quickly, it might be that there is a gap in the talent base you have on your board. So having someone with either nonprofit experience or a talent base that slots in and supports and can help educate the rest of the board could be very positive.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to close out by saying, thank you so much for being here for all panelists. Can we have a round of applause for them and how awesome they are? Thank you. And thank all of you for coming tonight. You are welcome to sign up for our email list, MWS. We will provide this link to the video, so you will have all your questions in forever in video form, and the answers. Also, I wanted to, let's see, Patty, did you want to do a cam plug or? Because we are on cam. And then I wanted to actually talk. So, come on, Patty. I know.
Hello. So Museum Workers Speak will have a session at CAM. Emily Holm and I are planning it, and he'll have Suvit Robinson from Hire and Hired Up. We're going to have Leah Vandermeer from the Cal Academy of Sciences, and it's all going to be about job descriptions, how we write them, how we create them, from any level in the career. So really thinking about that anatomy of the job description. So it'll be at CAM. It's going to be great. Terry's pointing at something. Yes.
Panel on the ethics and legalities of internships in the museum field. So please come on Thursday to a very enlightening panel discussion.
Did you mention that? Yeah, I did. And also, I wanted to actually point to Sarah, because she has actually a really good idea that I just heard today, and it's amazing.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank all of you, too. As we're talking about advocating for ourselves, I also wanted to invite all of you to advocate for museums in general. We've started, my name's Charlotte Jones. I'm at the Museum of Craft and Design over in Dogpatch. And we're starting a postcard campaign to encourage Congress to support the National Endowment for the Arts. So these are some examples of just like our old leftover collateral from exhibitions that we have laying around, just stacks and stacks of. So I'm throwing this hashtag on it, hashtag We Need Museums, which is now starting to link to photos of the kind of work that we're all doing in museums as a sort of visual reference to why they need to support National Endowment for the Arts. So I have some of these cards. I've got information on the back. I will be at the museum on Saturday from 2 to 4 with a bunch of craft supplies, some postcards, some blanks, some stuff like that if you want to come and just help me eat cookies and write postcards. I will be there. And then, yeah, that's about it. If you feel so inclined to also just, if you can't come on Saturday, organize this at your own museum. It's super easy. Hashtag We Need Museums tweeted at AAM, NE Arts, Kamala Harris, Senator Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, all those fine folks. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. So we'll break for a little mixer, and then I will kick you all out. Thank you again. Yeah.